I used an 8-inch square and an 8-inch round cake layer to make this heart shape, and all you do is you place the square cake on your cake board so that it's like a diamond shape, and then you just cut your round layer in half as evenly as possible, and then you're going to take a semicircle and put it on one side of the top of the diamond shape, and then take the other half of the round cake layer and put it on the other. Now you want them to match up as best as possible, so you may need to do a little bit of fine tuning and a little bit of trimming so that they fit together nice and flush. And I don't expect you to watch me trim this cake in real time, so I have sped it up, but you're basically going to want it to rest up against the edge of the cake as evenly as possible so that there's not a big gap there at the top. So you'll need to do the same thing for the other side, and you may also need to trim these bottom edges of the square cake to make them even. Then you're just going to use some icing to attach the 3 cake pieces together. Now I'm just going to use some icing to put a crumb coat on the cake. This is going to be what allows the chocolate fondant to stick to the cake. It doesn't have to be pretty, but I do want to make sure that the whole cake is covered. This cake is being really easy to ice because it's still partially frozen. I really do prefer working with a cold cake. It's a lot easier to handle, and especially if you're dealing with chocolate cake and you're worried about crumbs, definitely work with a cold or partially frozen cake. It will be much easier. And I just want to get enough icing spread across the top here so that the whole surface is covered, and that way the fondant will stick. I'm going to need to know how big of a piece of fondant to roll out, so I'm going to measure the height of the cake and then how wide it is at its widest points, and roll out a huge piece of fondant. And I'm going to use the fondant mat to lift it since it's such a big piece of fondant, and I'm going to try and get it to where it is pretty well centered over the cake so that it'll cover it. I like the fondant mat for covering bigger cakes because then you don't have to worry about lifting the fondant up and it stretching. You can just flip it over on top of the cake and then peel the mat away. And I'm just going to real quick trim away all this excess so that it doesn't dry out and it's not in my way. And then I'm just going to smooth the fondant down around the sides of the cake. This is some dark chocolate satin ice that I mixed with some white satin ice, so it's not quite as dark as it was when it came out of the tub. I also find that the chocolate satin ice is sort of a stiffer, firmer consistency, so adding a little bit of the white satin ice not only lightens the color, but it also lightens the feel a little bit. And now that I have the side smooth, I'm just going to trim away any leftover excess so that it's flush with the cake board. I'm not going to worry about that little tear by the corner of the heart. I'll cover that up somehow. But before I do anything else, I want to crimp the top edge of this cake. I have 2 different heart-shaped crimper tools, and I'm not really sure which one I want to use on the top of the cake, so I'm going to see what they look like here on just this piece of fondant that I rolled out. My first crimper tool is a serrated heart, and it has a little band on it, so you can pinch a lot of fondant or you can pinch just a small amount of fondant, and depending on how wide you have the pinchers open, that determines, you know, how the end result looks. And I also have just a regular straight heart crimper here. It doesn't have any serration, and I think of the 2 of them, I like that one better. You want to start crimping the edge of the cake as soon as you cover it with the fondant, because if the fondant starts to dry, then it could crack when you go to crimp it. And the trick is to just make each crimp as even as possible, and I'm just going to do a row of little hearts all along the top edge of this cake.